So I have a little project that I want to embark on today. I have this coat. This coat is from Linen Nave. It's one of my favorite coats ever, but the only thing that I don't like about this coat is the pockets are made out of a synthetic fabric. I think it's rayon, and every time I put my hand in these pockets, it just really bothers me. It gives me a lot of sensory issues. I know that especially for people who sew all the time, your hands get really dry from touching fabric because the fabric absorbs the oils from your skin. It causes you to have like dead skin or hangnails, and they just feel really dry all the time. Or if you're somebody who like works in healthcare or just you have to wash your hands a lot, you probably experience this too. So today I want to replace the pockets in this coat with a fabric that is a little bit more sensory friendly. So let's get started. Okay, one more note that I want to add. I know that I said that rayon is a synthetic fabric, and while that's not technically true, it is like based off of natural cellulose fibers. It is chemically treated, and I think that that's one of the reasons why it just doesn't feel as nice on your skin. And then I think that the other reason why I really don't like this fabric is because it's a satin kind of fabric. And satin fabrics, they are woven with like I think it's a 4:1 thread ratio. So like for every 4 threads that are going on the vertical threads, there's 1 thread going on the horizontal threads, and that's what creates like a really soft, smooth surface. But that being said, it also means that your cells, or I don't know, dead skin, whatever it is that's latching onto the fabric, has more opportunities to get caught on the loose fibers because they're not as tightly woven. And that's opposed to a regular, I think basket weave fabric is what it's called. That would be just like a plain weave linen or cotton, or I mean you could also have it from synthetic fabrics as well, but that's like a 1:1 weave. So those ones tend to be stronger in general and not quite as like that silky smooth thing that we think about when we think of satin fabrics. So with that in mind, technically if it was a rayon fabric that maybe was woven with more of a plain weave, then it would probably be okay for my skin, but just the fact that it is like a satin fabric, I think is what's bothering me the most about it when my skin touches it. Just wanted to clarify that. So now on to the project. So this is the fabric that I decided to go with. This is just a plain weave linen. This was in my scrap box. I think I just had this left over from a custom order I did for somebody. And it doesn't exactly match the coat, but you know, I have this scrap and this is just for me. It's not gonna bother me, and I really like the way that this feels against my skin, so I'm gonna go with this one. I did find this other fabric. This is 100% silk. This is still a satin fabric, so it does kind of bother me a little bit when I touch it. Maybe that's just me. I just feel like my fingers are overly sensitive to this kind of thing. But traditionally, if you're gonna replace the fabric in a coat, it traditionally would be using a fabric like this. It's something that gives like a very silky smooth finish. That's probably because it's nicer to put your hands in something that's smooth and silky rather than like a sort of rustic feeling linen, but I just tend to prefer this more for my needs. And so keep that in mind if you decide to do this project too, that this is not the traditional choice. So first thing we're gonna do is look at the structure of the pocket that already exists, and I basically am gonna want to make a copy of this pocket. So looking at it from this side, it pretty much does look like a traditional pocket. It does have a pocket facing, so that complicates things just a tiny bit, but if we look at the inside of the coat, thankfully this coat is open on the bottom, so it makes it really easy to get inside, but on other coats you might find that this is stitched down, in which case you would have to undo that to get inside to your pocket, but that's not really that hard to do, you know, just take out some stitches and then you'll be able to reach inside of it pretty easily. So here is the actual pocket. And yeah, this looks really basic. This is your standard pocket. And lucky for me, it looks like they did not overlock seam the pocket fabric to the coat fabric, so it's going to be really easy to take that out. And the only complicated part is it does look like the spacing is sewn on top of the pocket fabric, so that facing that we were looking at before right here is sewn first to the pocket, and then together it's sewn as one to the coat. So I may or may not preserve this. I'm going to take a look at it once I get this off and decide from there. So the next step would be to take the pocket off, and this is a little bit scary because, you know, once you start doing this, there's no going back, but let's give it a go. So I've got my trusty razor blade here, and that's what I'm going to use to remove this. This is coming off really easily, which is a blessing. And I'm actually, looks like I'm taking off 2 different stitches at once right now with my razor blade, but you know, if you just had a seam ripper, you'd probably just go at this one at a time. You could take it out this way, on this side, or on this side, but my razor blade, I find this is the fastest way to do it. And it's off. I'm not going to take the pocket off of the other side just yet because I do find that it is helpful to have a reference to look at to see how the original manufacturers did it. So I'm going to leave this one on for now so that I can look at it, and then once I finish this side, then I will do the other one. So looking back at this pocket for reference to the facing, you can see that it is serged all the way along the edge here. So it would require taking those stitches out. And I do really like this facing, and you know, maybe some days I'm feeling more lazy, but this is a project that I've really been thinking about for a long time. So I think I'm gonna do it the right way, and I'm gonna take the stitching out of this. But for something like removing these kinds of stitches, I definitely want to use a seam ripper for that because the razor is just not gonna be able to get at the right angles. So I'm just gonna take this stitching out. We've got the facing successfully removed. So the next step is to create a pattern for the pocket based off of this pocket. So first I'm going to iron my pocket out so that it gives us an easier flat piece to copy the pattern on. Okay, so copying the pattern for the pocket, it's really easy. I've got a piece of paper here. Before I get started, it is kind of nice to just draw a straight line because I know that this line on the pocket here is supposed to be on the straight of grain. So I'm just gonna start off with a nice straight line. I'm gonna just put some pattern weights here, hold that in place, and loosely trace around my pocket. Now, to be honest, the shape that you draw here doesn't really matter that much. This is a pretty classic pocket shape, so you know, you don't want to stray too far from this, but in terms of making this like exactly the same as your original pocket, you don't need to worry about that as much. The only part that really is important is we want the width of the pocket to be the same as our original. So right there and right there. I'm gonna take this off. And there's our pocket. I'm gonna go around with my French curve to make it a little bit smoother. You don't have to do this if you don't have one of these, but you know, it just makes it a little bit easier to get a nice curve. So I'm just gonna look back at my original pocket again to figure out which side of the pocket I'm doing. So on this pocket, the facing goes on this side. You can see where my leftover stitches are for where I took that out. So it's gonna go like this. So I'll take this one off and put that on there like this. I'm just gonna pin this on here. Okay, and so now this facing is ready to be attached to the pocket and treated as one. So I'm just gonna sew it down right here. And while I'm at it, I'm gonna sew the rest of the facing down to the pocket everywhere. This will just help keep things together when we're sewing the pocket later on. All right, I'll just give this an iron and then on to the next step. So in my original pocket here, this pocket is serged all the way around the outside edge, and that's how you put the pocket together. So I'm gonna serge this and then we'll be ready to attach it to the coat. On second thought, I'm gonna stitch around the pocket first before I do the serging. Basically, I'm gonna just stitch these two pieces together and then do the serging to finish off the edges. But the reason why I'm not just gonna serge it, even though I do have a 4-thread overlock machine, which means that it does have a sewing stitch in it, you know, it does make a tight enough stitch to not have to do this extra step. But since this is a pocket, it's gonna get a lot of strain on these stitches here, so I want to do like a standard lock stitch on the sewing machine before the serging, just to give it an extra layer of strength in the pockets. Before I do that though, I am going to individually serge this seam and this seam so that when I stitch this together, this little corner here is already finished. Now that has a nice serged finish on it. Ideally, I would have done this in brown, but on this side I had to do it in gray, so a choice had to be made. And now we can just stitch this together. Just gonna serge this again, then we're pretty much done with our pocket. Okay, that is all cleanly finished and ready to be attached to the coat. So going back to our coat as a reference, facing goes on the side of the pocket that might be seen when you are sticking your hand in. So that means that on this side, the facing is gonna go here. And of course that makes sense because we want our pocket to face down, obviously. We don't want a pocket going this direction. So I'm gonna put this inside of the coat. So it'll be sewn in like that. And we are gonna work this from the inside. So there's our seam. And I'm gonna take the very tip here and align it with this point here. And I'm just gonna pin that right there. If you check on this coat, the stitching of the pocket actually continues beyond where this seam ends. So our pocket will probably be longer than this opening. So if we look at this, yeah, the pocket ends here and then this extends all the way down here. The next step is to get sewing. Most importantly, I really want to make sure that I sew all the way up into where the seam is supposed to meet. So try to get your sewing machine needle to stitch as close as you can. Try to get a better look at this with my phone camera. So I'm going to put the needle down right there. You can see that it is pretty dang close to where the seam begins, and that is exactly what we want. So on this side, I'm going to do the same thing where I make sure that my seams are perfectly aligned there. Sewing down this side, be careful not to catch the other side of the seam allowance when you stitch this down. The last and final thing that I'm going to do, which my other side of the pocket does have, is a row of understitching on the inside of the pocket. This helps to keep the pocket fabric inside of the coat and prevents it from rolling out like this. So that's a very important last step, a minor detail, but really helpful in improving the overall look of a tailored garment. So to do that, it starts to get a little crowded on the sewing machine. I'm gonna have to fit my coat underneath the sewing needle and make sure that you're sewing on the correct side, not the side with the facing. That doesn't really need that. And when you sew this, you're gonna want to make sure that you sew with the seam allowance flipped towards the pocket where you're doing the understitch. So my seam allowance is right here for both sides. There's no seam allowance on this side. I have it all folded this way. And I think we're done. So the last and final step would be to, of course, iron your pocket, which I did off screen, but that is really important to give it that finished tailored look, so make sure you don't skip that part. And here is the final result. So right now it still has the two different pockets in it, and honestly you can't even tell that it's totally different. In hindsight, I really do wish that I would have done a matching fabric for the pocket, because it did turn out really nice, and I think that the fact that there's just like a random color of gray in there kind of makes it look a little bit cheaper, or just kind of random. But really just wanted to use a scrap fabric that I had, and I really like the way that this one fell. So you have to pick your battles. And if anything, the fact that it is a different color reminds me that I was the one that did this, and it tells a little story to the coat. And I think that there's something special about that, especially since I rarely take the time to do little sewing projects for myself anymore. So the fact that I stopped to do something that was really just for me is just like a little bit of self-care in like pocket form. It is a little quirky, but I'm really happy with it. And I'm really curious to know if this inspires you to do the same to one of your coats. If it does, be sure to let me know, and I'm really curious to see how it works out for you. In the meantime, I still have another pocket to finish, and I better do it now, otherwise I may never do it. So until next time.